Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another one of our webinars. Today we have Miami Presents, a practical guide to food and hydration choices. With us today is Bryn Beeder. She is a registered dietitian nutritionist with a passion for food, health, and helping others make sense of nutrition in a way that actually works for their lives. She earned her degree from Miami in 2014, where she developed a deep interest in how people think about food and make nutrition choices. Her career spans several nutritional applications from long-term care to inpatient and outpatient nutrition at the UC Medical Center. In 2020, she stepped away from a clinical nutrition to start a family. She now has 3 children and a dog. And in 2022, she returned to Miami as a visiting faculty member. And teaching has been an exciting shift, allowing her to bring nutrition to life for students and reconnect with the campus she loved as a student. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Bryn. I'll go ahead and, actually, before we start, I want to remind live viewers that you can use the Ask a Question button to submit questions or comments. And we'll have some time at the end for live questions. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Bryn. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Emily. And it really is exciting to be here today. I appreciate the invitation. And I titled this presentation, A Practical Guide to Food and Hydration Choices. And the title is really because that is my favorite part of nutrition. It's my favorite part of being a registered dietitian nutritionist. What I like to do is take a field like our field of nutrition, which is so deeply rooted in science principles, and then make it make sense to people, because science doesn't always help you out when you're in the middle of a really busy day. But practical food decisions and kind of figuring out and making sense of it is typically the creative part that I really enjoy. So throughout this presentation, what I want to do is mix a little bit of the science in with also just talking about what does food and nutrition look like? And where I think it starts is the state, what I'm calling the state of diet culture. So nutrition advice is everywhere. You can't turn around and not see some nutrition advice or have a conversation with a friend and hear things about nutrition. That could be on TV, you could read it in a book, maybe you're reading research, but also just casually, Facebook, Instagram, conversations with friends. You're going to hear all kinds of different things about nutrition, and often that opens the door for that nutrition advice and information to be quite contradictory. It starts to get really confusing because sometimes you can hear from one person, hey, did you see the study that coffee every day is actually really great for your brain? And then somebody else says, oh my gosh, no, because I'm pretty sure coffee every day is really bad for your heart. And now all of a sudden, what do you do with that, right? And so I'm going to hopefully help you kind of sort out a little bit of this today, but you can tell me at the end. Here's a few more examples of what these headlines look like and why I think it does start to get really confusing. So a few examples that I just pulled from different news outlets recently, starting with what parents need to pay attention to on nutrition labels, followed by FDA unveils proposed rules to put nutrition facts on the front of the package. So now those nutrition labels, maybe you need to look somewhere else. And a few more examples, brain boosting nutrition tips for busy families. That sounds important. 60% of baby foods in study don't meet nutrition standards. That can be alarming. Here's 10 foods rich in vitamin E, 9 fruits with the most potassium, 9 foods high in vitamin K, and it's all for really noble causes, right? Things like preventing bone loss. What else does it say on here? Healthy blood pressure, heart health. And if my math is right here, that's 28 foods that maybe you're not consuming enough of right now, or you need to consider. The next one, what do weight loss drugs mean for a diet industry built on eating less and exercising more? Ultra-processed foods are everywhere. How bad are they? How much cheese should you eat a day? Let's all cross our fingers for a good outcome on that one. And then this one, electrolyte beverages can help your body stay balanced, but may worsen symptoms if you're sick. And who wrote that but myself, right? So like headlines are confusing, and they're also meant to grab your attention, and there's not a lot of escaping that. that's how the industry survives, but that's also how you get clicks, right? Like that's how you get people to engage with the information that you're trying to put out. The complicated part is figuring out which advice should I actually stick to and listen to more closely. So let's take a little closer look at food and nutrition trends. This is specifically in the diet arena. And so I made a little timeline that certainly is not complete. There's no way I could put every single diet from the past, looking at least 40 plus years here. However, I want to just kind of paint a picture of maybe where we've been in diet culture and where we are today, maybe where we're going. So rewinding to the 1980s, low-fat diet and low-fat foods were really prevalent. Low-fat diets specifically became a pretty large ideology in general. And this was for a noble cause. So dating all the way back to the 1940s is when researchers first found a correlation between high-fat diet consumption and high cholesterol levels. And that has real implications on atherosclerotic diseases, heart disease. And so that's a really important connection that was made. And so as a result, what came from that was, hey, maybe everyone should consume a low-fat diet in the name of health. And so low-fat diets became the ideology that was pumped out from doctors' offices to the CDC and the USDA in the 1980s. And as a result, you saw food manufacturers too jump on board, and all of a sudden, an ice cream was low fat. It was fat-free. Fig Newtons were low fat or reduced fat. You saw all kinds of things that you typically wouldn't associate with as being a low-fat product. Now they are. But what's important to note here too is that something always has to give a little bit. So fat does a lot for a food product. It gives the product some structure, some bulk. It's also going to give a really great creaminess and flavor to a lot of products. Think about ice cream and cookies. And now think about the scenario where you want to make chocolate chip cookies this afternoon and you say, you know what, I'm going to take the butter out. And now what kind of a product are you ending up with? Well, it's probably not going to be edible. Certainly won't be satisfying. And it's probably not going to look like a cookie at all. So what happens when food manufacturers make low-fat food products? Well, another ingredient has to go in and take the place of what was taken out. And the number one ingredient that was typically used to replace fat was sugar. And that's because sugar gave great flavor. You could mix it with some water, and now you've got a little bit more bulk to the product. Low-fat and reduced-fat margarines and butters typically are whipped because you whip in some air with the water. And so something had to give there. And so what we saw with low-fat diets was, one, a 53% decrease in deaths from heart disease. That's wildly significant. And if you're kind of just thinking about that on the surface level, that's wildly successful. So why would we step away from that? Well, while the deaths from heart disease decreased significantly, rates of heart disease remained steady. And what you actually saw is in the 80s, a little bit of an increase, or beginning to an increase in rates of obesity. So the question that kind of came out of that was, man, was the low-fat diet really the silver bullet we were looking for? Or are we still kind of on the hunt for the nutritional answer? So then you saw more products kind of follow suit. Maybe we should do sugar-free. Maybe it's more about low sodium, and so on and so forth. When you fast forward then to the 1990s, I have on there Weight Watchers. You could kind of edge that into the 2000s as well. Weight Watchers has rebranded and had different iterations of its program over the last several decades. It is still around today, but it really peaked in the late 90s, early 2000s, especially when Oprah endorsed it on her show as well. You also had the Atkins diet in the 2000s. And if you remember the Atkins diet, there were a lot of supplements that were sold, a lot of protein bars and things like that. And the real idea in the Atkins diet was high protein, low carb. And if that sounds a little bit familiar, you'd be right, because the ketogenic diet isn't all that far off from that kind of ideology as well. Move again forward to the 2010s, and I have paleo diet there. The paleo diet gained a lot of popularity when CrossFit endorsed it as its preferred diet. And the Mediterranean diet also rose to fame. Now, the difference here is that you may have heard about things like the Atkins diet, but then maybe you don't hear about it as much today. Mediterranean diet you still hear about a lot, and that is with good reason. It's been endorsed by the American Heart Association and the American Diabetes Association due to really robust research showing great clinical outcomes for patients that adhere to the diet in terms of heart disease as well as diabetes. And then where are we at today? So in the 2020s, I find with students a lot, people are really interested in plant-based diets, maybe not full on veganism, but some sort of vegetarianism or flexitarian diet. The ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, which interestingly peaked in the year 2020, and then the carnivore diet too. And again, this is just a small sampling of kind of some of the diets that have shaped our culture through the years. So nutrition is a really interesting field to be in today. There is a lot of interest in nutrition. I would argue that there's a decent amount of concern, especially when it comes to specific ingredients, perhaps additives, and those types of nutrition components as well. And so one thing that I think is important in this kind of a environment is to recognize, one, that there's a lot of opportunity. I hope that there's a lot of opportunity for nutrition professionals to be a little bit louder in their communication of the fundamentals of nutrition, some of those things that aren't going to change, things like the value of fruits and vegetables, fiber, a glass of water, maybe resetting your whole day, right? So those are the fundamentals that won't change, but there's also opportunity for new fixes, so to speak, to come out. There's opportunity for people to seize the moment and come up with a new diet plan or a new supplement that is supposed to really fix things for the consumer. And so there's money to be made. And so sometimes this can be like a little bit of a push and pull on who do you listen to and which headlines do you give your attention to. So specifically on social media, I have there, if a statement gives you a big reaction, an emotional one, a reaction that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've been eating that. Can't believe that's going on. Is that really the case? Like, I thought that was healthy, you know, whatever that is. If something gives you a big reaction, pause. It's a really good opportunity to pause and look for the professionals in the field to lean on for advice. Just as I would want to lean on the professionals in the finance field if I needed help with my taxes, right? Or starting a business or whatever the case may be. So in nutrition, the professionals that you're looking for are registered dietitian nutritionists, R.D.Ns. And so the registered dietitian nutritionists, we have spent more time than probably any of us wanted to in classes like chemistry, biochemistry, organic chemistry, microbiology, anatomy, physiology, right? We spent all that time to learn how are nutrients used by the body? Why is it important for me to know that how glucose is metabolized and runs through the Krebs cycle to create cellular energy in the form of ATP, right? Like I learned all of that material so that we can make sense of these headlines over time. And so nutrition professionals and ones that I most respect in our field are ones who are measured. They're not having knee-jerk reactions to headlines. They're confident in what they know, and they're curious about the field. Curiosity is the spice to the field, right? I mean, being curious about nutrition means that I'm still open to the idea that research is being done and something might come up that changes my practice. There are things that I believe in today from a nutrition perspective and from my experience working with patients that coming in as a new dietitian, I didn't necessarily know or feel. And so learning that and being flexible as a professional is important in this field too. So moving back to our conversation on diets, how to spot a diet, and maybe one that's just going to be a trend rather than a long-term stick around kind of diet, is diets have a few things in common. Number one, they promise a satisfying result quickly. It's a timeliness thing. 30-day detox, lose 12 pounds in the next 2 months, whatever the case may be, there's a satisfying result that people grab onto. Number two, it may require or encourage specific products or supplements for success. Don't discount the idea that there's money to be made in this industry. The diet and health industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So you have to look at that and be critical of, hey, if I have to pay for a lot of supplements for success, it may be another moment to pause for a second before you proceed. And number three, diet culture loves to emphasize the importance of sticking to the plan. I put the words down there, willpower and resilience. And what this means is diet culture will love to tell you, you got to stick to the plan. How strong of a person are you? Are you going to push through? Are you going to push aside all these foods that you really like? What are you going to do when the going gets tough? Do you have the brute force to make it happen? And then after the timeline that they have kind of prescribed where you should see results, if you don't see those satisfying results, well, that's on you, right? You probably just didn't have the guts to stick it out. But the one thing that you won't find in diets is them telling you, hey, maybe the plan wasn't set up to be overly sustainable long-term after all. So before I kind of keep going back to the diets and kind of talk more about the practical tips, I think that the argument that I want to get to eventually is that kind of parsing out what you eat in a day and making it practical for yourself, maybe as simple and also maybe as complex as relearning your hunger and fullness cues. So I'll get to the practical piece, but let's start with the physiology, because there's obviously a body system. Your body's programmed to tell you when you are hungry and when you are full. What that's going to say here is hunger and satiety. So hunger is one thing. Satiety is just another name for fullness. It's how satiated you are, is how satisfied you feel for how long after you eat a meal, a snack, whatever the case may be. So there's physiological pathways for this. So when there's two hormones, ghrelin and leptin, that regulate your hunger and satiety. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone. And ghrelin, it says on that graphic that it comes from the gut. It mostly comes from the stomach. It does get released a little bit in the small intestine as well. But the majority of ghrelin comes from the large portion of the stomach called the fundus. And that is because that portion of the stomach is sensitive to how distended it is, or kind of how pressed upon it is, or how deflated or relaxed the muscle of the stomach is at any given time. When it's more relaxed, ghrelin is able to be released to tell you, hey, when you're hungry. The way I've always remembered ghrelin is growling. Your stomach's growling. Ghrelin is letting you know. All right, and then you move over to leptin, and leptin is the satiety hormone, and it comes from the adipose tissue, which is the fat cells of the body. And so in your mind, it would make sense too that as you have extra fat cells in the body, you would probably be able to sustain your satiety for longer between meals. However, that's not always the case. So sometimes with excess body fat, you can actually have what's called leptin resistance, which means the brain actually isn't as sensitive to the calls from leptin and can kind of override and allow for overeating over time. There's more than just excess body fat, though, that can cause leptin resistance to other things: stress and lack of sleep. Does that sound familiar? When we're tired or when we're lacking sleep, those are moments when a lot of people talk about emotional eating, or just like not feeling like you're on your game when it comes to nutrition. I have one extra note about hormones because these are probably ones that you have heard about as well. Insulin and glucagon both come from your pancreas. And so they are useful in blood sugar regulation in the body. So when everything's working correctly, insulin is the hormone that is released and tells the cells of the body, hey, blood sugar levels are high. Pull that blood sugar out of the bloodstream and into the cells to lower blood glucose levels. Glucagon works in the opposite direction. And glucagon is really the reason that in between meals, if you have to go an extra couple hours before you eat next, your blood sugar levels don't bottom out, because glucagon is there to tell the body, hey, blood sugar levels are a little low. Why don't we break down some of our stores of glucose called glycogen and send that into the bloodstream to regulate those blood glucose levels? And that's insulin and glucagon. GLP-1 I put in there because you've likely heard of that more recently in the media, specifically in terms of GLP-1 medications. Ozempic is a really commonly discussed one. And GLP-1 is actually a naturally occurring hormone in the body. It comes from something called the L cells in the intestine, small intestine, and it's released after you eat. And what it does is it helps to increase levels of insulin, helping to pull glucose out of the bloodstream, and it also suppresses glucagon. It also will delay gastric emptying. And what that means is stuff just sits in the stomach longer. So after you eat, it'll slow down that process of things emptying out of the stomach, making you feel fuller for longer. So that's really how GLP-1 medications work. They kind of amplify that whole process. So that's why at the beginning of GLP-1s, they were used for diabetes control, specifically for that insulin portion, but in specific doses can also lead to weight loss. Okay, so let's get back to hunger and fullness, and here are my questions to you. Number one, do you always respond to your body when it is hungry? Do you respond with food? Or have you ever heard people say, sometimes when you feel hungry, you're actually just thirsty? Well, maybe, right? Like, you certainly can always start with a cup of water, and I would never say no to that. But sometimes your body is just telling you that you're hungry, and it's appropriate to respond with food, and it's most helpful to your body as well. Number two, do you always respond to your body when you are full? And then number three might be the most important of the three questions, and that is, can you identify what those signals and sensations feel like? How often are you sitting in a scenario where you do get a hunger cue, but you're in the middle of a really important meeting, you're driving, you're doing whatever the case may be, right? And you have to ignore that. So how often are you responding to these? Eventually, your body becomes a little less consistent if you are constantly overriding its cues. So it's important to kind of recognize, what do these actually feel like? So this enters the case for mindful and intuitive eating. Mindful eating, there's a lot of definitions there. I have one written out there that you are welcome to read. Mindful eating is born out of the practice of mindfulness. And if you've heard of mindfulness, it's not all that different from like a meditation process. It's about body awareness. It's about being present in a moment and being able to appreciate thoughts, feelings, emotions, and being able to tune into that. So what does that look like when it's put on top of the eating process? That means we're turning off our phones while we eat. It means we are not watching TV while we're eating. It means you're not doing a million things for work while you're eating. And that can be really challenging in our society. The second one there is intuitive eating, and this concept was first defined by two dietitians. I have their names and credentials there, is Evelyn and Elise, and it's based upon the idea that we're all born intuitive eaters, and it's external factors that disrupt our ability to kind of tune in and eat by hunger and fullness cues. So I'm going to put up here's the 10 principles of intuitive eating. And if you just Google intuitive eating, you can go to the website set up by Evelyn and Elise, and it'll give you all of these principles, also a lot of research in this area. However, I wanted to just kind of show you what it's based upon, but here's kind of the nuts and bolts. So intuitive eating is this idea that when if you have ever been around a newborn baby, it is not too difficult to figure out when they're hungry. Am I right? They're probably screaming and it's disruptive, right? So you know that they are hungry when they are crying, they're awake, they are upset. Then you feed that baby, you give them a bottle, and when they are full, they stop eating. You don't have to rip a bottle out of a baby's mouth to be like, whoa, whoa, I feel like we're probably done here, right? You don't have to do that. You just feed them and they will stop when they're full. And it's not hard to tell when they are satiated because they're typically cooing, they're asleep, or at least they've stopped crying. And those are 3 things that we really like in newborns, right? So those are the kind of cues that you get, but this is a very intuitive process, and then they will sleep. And then when they get hunger cues, boy, will they wake up and start screaming again. So they can eat by that process until we, as the, all-knowing adults, right, kind of intervene with the process, or peer pressure gets in the way, or social media enters the chat. I wanted to also put a few examples of research because intuitive eating has been studied in a variety of applications, but I wanted to highlight a few for you. The first one there, intuitive eating buffers the link between internalized weight stigma and body mass index in stressed adults. Intuitive eating is associated with higher fruit and vegetable intake among adults. We love that. Effective nutritional behavioral intervention on intuitive eating in overweight women with chronic kidney disease. I popped this one in here for a specific reason, and that is this. Sometimes we put food restrictions on ourselves, and those are typically things that we perceive as important, whether that's like a value that we have or a nutrition knowledge that we know this food is more nutrient dense than this food. But those are all things that we kind of have choices over. There are also scenarios such as chronic kidney disease or diabetes would be another great example where medical nutrition therapy is imperative to the eating process. Adhering to a strict diet is what maintains a specific disease state where it is and hopefully prevents it from progressing prematurely. And then finally, making the leap from healthy to disordered eating. And this is talking about specifically orthorexia in women. And intuitive and mindful eating have been used in various disordered eating applications with a lot of success to kind of, again, reconnect to hunger and fullness in a specific state of mind where it's really hard to do that, or those cues have been ignored for so long that it's about reconnecting to the eating process, period. All right, so a little bit more of a practical look here too. Listening to your hunger and fullness cues, where can you start? This may look overly simplistic, but go with me. Okay, so this is a 0 to 10 scale. 0 is I am starving. I have gone beyond the point of hangry, right? I am irritable. I am ripping the kitchen cabinets open until I find something because I am so hungry. 10, on the other hand, is Thanksgiving full. I'm uncomfortable. I am gonna pop, right? Like this is probably a little painful. Okay, so that's your hunger to fullness. 3 to 7 is what I highlighted as kind of your sweet spot range. And that is because between 3 and 7 is where you will most be able to respond appropriately to hunger and fullness cues without adding like an extra emotional kind of ravenous component to it as well. So 3, you're hungry and you need to eat. Perfect. I can go and figure out what that is. 7, hunger is gone. If I stop now, I'm full. Great. Those are all very like neutral moments. And then 5 would be your most neutral, where it's like, I'm not hungry or full. I'm just going to kind of wait and see when my body cues me next. So when it comes down to actually making food choices, one thing that I think is important to consider is how do you speak about or hear about food? I put a few examples on here of things that I feel I have heard more commonly. Probably the most is that first blue box, and that is good versus bad foods. It is not uncommon at all for people to have their good food bucket and their bad food bucket. Here's my good bucket full of salads and fruit salads and a real seedy, weedy piece of bread. And then here's my bad bucket full of brownies and cake and chips and pizza. And we talk about it like that. And not only that, but it typically goes a little beyond that, where then when have you heard, like how often have you heard people say things like this? I was bad today because I ate the pizza. I wasn't going to do it, but I was bad. I was bad. This is my cheat meal. Okay. And when we do that, when we place the terms good and bad on foods, it really is placing an extra level of moral value on the food that doesn't need to be there. And I know in theory that kind of sounds silly. It's like, it's not a moral thing. Well, it shouldn't be. But then when you kind of start to talk to yourself over and over about food choices in terms of, I was good today because I ate the salad, I was bad today because I ate this, what you say and speak to yourself over and over does matter in how you start to relate to food, how you think about food, and ultimately what foods you decide to put into your body or not. So it does make a difference. I put some other ones on there, things like cravings and emotional eating, maybe clean food or whole food. So how do you think about food? So if you're trying to kind of move away from this idea of like good and bad foods and be a little bit more intuitive, what that means is you're trying to ultimately free up your mental load of food rules and eat according to what you have and want. So both things can be true. Food rules in general and really tight programs that have very little flexibility to them are really easy ways to make yourself feel extra guilty over time. Because then when you break a rule, again, that's not like a quality that people want to feel in and of themselves. I don't want to feel like I'm constantly breaking a rule every day when it just comes to food that I'm eating. And so moving away from that can be really challenging. So what does this actually look like in practice? I'm going to divide it up by children and adults because it's a different ballgame with each. So with children, they don't have a lot of food experience. So what you start with them is you want to introduce a variety of foods. So certainly a variety of nutrient-dense foods, also like fun foods, right? Like you want to introduce a variety of things. You want to allow unrestricted access. That one probably sounds scary and like it wouldn't work. So let me get back to that in a second. Encouraging them to listen to their bodies. So being in tune with them and saying things like, hey, it's really cool. Your body will actually tell you when it's time to eat, and then it'll tell you when you feel full and when you can stop eating. Like teaching them to trust that process and trust their body can be really impactful because they're so young. And then finally, using more food neutral language. And food neutral language means a few different things. So rather than saying like, this brownie is bad or it's unhealthy, just saying, simply putting a plate of food down and saying, hey, on the menu for breakfast today, we have an Eggo waffle, some strawberries, maybe that's a milk, like whatever the case may be in your household, right? What you have available and what you want to do, you provide it. And then you let them decide what they're going to eat. This also means refraining from having really large reactions to what kids do and don't eat at the dinner table. So this can be really challenging, but when you're introducing new foods to kids, it can take, depending on what literature you look at, it can take anywhere from 8 up to 15, maybe even 20 exposures before a kid will accept a new food. And by acceptance, that doesn't even always mean the acceptance was they ate the whole piece of broccoli. It might just mean they were willing to pick it up, put it in their mouth, and then spit it back out. It is a long game. And so you really have to sign up for a patience party when you kind of introduce intuitive eating in children. But before we move on, let me bounce back up to allowing unrestricted access. So there's some really interesting research that was done back in 1997. So this was found quite a while ago, right? But pre-meal calorie loading. So what they did is they went into a preschool classroom, and so many of the kids, they gave a pre-meal calorically dense drink. So kind of like sugar water, let's say. And it was so many calories. They gave that to them before they had lunch. The other group did not receive that. So then they went to lunchtime and they basically set out a buffet and said, have at it, it's lunchtime. And the kids went and chose their foods from that buffet. And what they found is the kids who had the calorically dense drink before the meal took less food and consumed less food at lunchtime. The kids who did not receive the pre-meal drink ate more. And what they found is across the board, all the kids kind of ended up eating roughly the same number of calories and nutrient density overall, showing that kids can really regulate even when they're allowed to choose it for themselves. Okay, so I have Emily mentioned I have 3 kids. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So we try to lean into this practice as much as possible. So I thought I would show you kind of like a real life situation. So in our house, we provide and then they decide. The one thing that they decide is their dessert item. So all of the food is presented to them at one time. It's not, hey, eat this and then you'll get dessert. We provide it all at once because the idea that we're trying to push here is food, right? If I take the dessert item and I say, you know what, once you eat that food, you can have this cookie and I'm going to put it up on this high shelf so you can see it and hopefully be motivated by it. But I'm not going to give it to you until you do X, until you eat so many bites of vegetable, until you clean your plate. Well, I have just created a really high value item that they're going to be totally preoccupied with. It's like the idea of like, if I said right now, like think about anything for the next minute, but don't think about elephants. And you're sitting there thinking like, why would she say that? What is that about, right? And now you're just like, did something happen to elephants? Like, was there a new one born at the zoo? Like, what's the deal with elephants? Why would she say that? Same thing. If I put the Pop-Tarts up there, I put the brownies up there, they can see it and now they're super preoccupied. And what you will see in literature too is when you restrict, when you eventually do provide that restricted item, kids are way more likely to overeat on that item. And it's the same for adults. Same thing in literature. If you restrict it for yourself and then all of a sudden you provide it to yourself, you're going to be more likely to overconsume that item. So back to the trays that you're looking at. So we provided all the stuff. They got to choose their dessert item. And so my daughter chose an ice cream cone. My son chose a popsicle. And here was the result. So after the meal, my daughter started with her ice cream cone. She loved it. She ate the whole thing. And then she also ate cucumbers. And then the one thing that I can't really depict in a picture, but this is absolutely true. She ate the cucumber slices and then proceeded to eat like half of a cucumber. And again, I'm not even trying to do this to give myself a pat on the back, but I do want to show you this is what it looks like in practice, and it can work. It is also really kind of scary at times because as much as intuitive eating is a great process, it couldn't be more counterintuitive to how we typically think about food. And then you can see my son didn't even touch his popsicle. He ate a couple carrots. He ate his corn puff, whatever those things are. And that was pretty much it. So in adults, the thing that's important here, and probably what I should have listed first, is that last point. this requires buy-in. It requires buy-in if you are going to implement it to children. It requires buy-in if you're going to implement it in yourself. You have to buy into the process and believe that it's going to actually work over time and that these things are true before you can actually be successful. You also have to acknowledge your own food relationship. How did you grow up? How was food presented to you? How was it talked about? How do you talk about food right now? What are the food items that are just totally off limits for you and the things that you restrict yourself from, even though it might be a craving? You want to think about food in a more neutral way. So changing the language, like I was talking about before, change up how you talk about food to yourself. And appreciate food as fuel too. There is no food that your body is going to be super surprised with and doesn't know what to do with. Your body is programmed to metabolize all of the nutrients that you give it. So food is fuel. Here's another, I kind of like this graphic to show you the difference in practice of what someone who's on a strict diet plan and what an intuitive eater might how they might approach a situation differently. So on the left, you have someone following a pretty strict diet plan. This would be somebody who's going to an office party and there's pizza there. They look at it and they're like, wow, that looks really good. Hopefully not with the spinach, right? I don't know if that particular piece of pizza looks great, but you go to the office party, you're like, man, that pizza looks good. It smells great, but I'm going to be good. I'm going to resist, I'm going to push through, and I'm not going to eat it. And then you go home, and whether or not you're actually thinking about the pizza or not, your mind is still preoccupied with the fact that you didn't satisfy a craving earlier. So now you're going to go around at dinner, and you're going to continue to try to satisfy a craving and potentially overeat. An intuitive eater would go to the same office party, see the piece of pizza, and go, man, that looks really good. And I'm going to eat it. And so they would eat the piece of pizza and now they've satisfied the craving. Maybe they have another piece of pizza because it's just that good. And then they go home that night and recognize my body doesn't really feel hungry. So maybe I'll just have a light snack and go to bed. And so it's a different approach, but sometimes you can save yourself a little bit of grief if you just satisfy the craving that your mind wants before you kind of try to do all the resisting that we might be taught a little bit more in diet culture. So here's my 3 practical tips. Start with hunger and fullness. I do think that, like I said, it might be as simple and as complex as getting retuned into how hungry am I and when am I full? Do I know what that feels like in my body? Do I have the time? Am I giving myself the time of day to even figure that out? And how does it kind of change up how I interact with food? Lean on the fundamentals of nutrition. There are fundamentals that will never go away. Regardless of headlines, the nutrient density and impact of fruits and vegetables will never change. The impact of fiber on your digestive and gut microbiome will never change. A glass of water is always going to help. Those are the things that you can really lean on, even in turbulent times where there's a lot of headlines about ingredients and things like that. And then finally, permission to appreciate all aspects of food. This is something that I always say to each of my nutrition classes, and that is this. Food is meant to be enjoyable. It really is. It's not meant to be something that you punish yourself with. Food is delicious, right? There are some foods that are very delicious. And that's okay, because what's really interesting too is a lot of the neurological pathways that allow you to smell food, taste food, and appreciate those flavors and that kind of smell profile when you're eating a food are the same neurological pathways that build long-term memories. It's why you can go and smell a food and be transported back to your grandma's kitchen or to the best vacation ever, right? Because all of a sudden it triggers that memory that brings you back to things. We create connection with people through food. And so appreciate it as fuel. It is certainly that. Appreciate the connection that you can have with other people. And then finally, remember that food is delicious. And sometimes it's as simple as getting back to that and recognizing that just because you satisfy a craving doesn't mean you failed. You're probably going to be able to psychologically move past the craving a lot faster once it's satisfied. So that is, I believe, my last slide. Yes. So again, I want to say thank you for having me, but then also open it up, Emily, for any live questions that you all might have. I also put my contact info there. I'm on LinkedIn. I also put my personal email there. My Miami email you can certainly find on Miami's website. Admittedly, it's the end of the semester and I'm getting a lot of emails from a lot of students. And so things get buried a little more quickly in that inbox right now. So if you want to reach out by my personal email, that's also fine.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. A lot of great information. We do have a few live questions. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Felt that coming on and I'm like, all right, get the question out. Get the question out.
That's fine. That's fine.
So I'm sorry. One of the questions that came in was, how do and you may have covered some of these in your presentation, but people asking just want a little bit more clarification or even just a little reminder. So how do our nutritional needs change as we age? I know you talked about from children on up. So
yeah,
more about that.
For sure. There's some things that'll change a little bit. As you age, you do want to incorporate a little bit more protein into your diet throughout the aging process specifically. That helps to maintain muscle stores and hopefully just keep, just keep you a little bit more robust and balanced too. So you want to build up muscles to also reinforce bone structure too, to just help in case there was to be a fall or something of that nature. So focusing on protein as you get older can be helpful. A couple nutrition needs that don't really change across the lifespan are the importance of calcium and vitamin D. Calcium is going to be great for bone structure, certainly for children who are still building the bulk of their bone mass. And then vitamin D is also there to ensure that calcium is absorbed a little bit more effectively. So keeping both of those in the diet is good. That'll also help though throughout the lifespan. So keeping those in check. Well, there's things that change like depending on different life stages, things like pregnancy. Certainly once you enter chronic disease states into the mix, then that can really change up the medical nutrition therapy aspect. But those are just a couple of things that come to mind.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another one is you mentioned several popular diets. Are there some that are easier to stick to than the others? Should we just let diets go altogether? Or that was the question.
Yeah. There's some, so what I would be, I guess, a greater proponent of would be trying to kind of release some of the food rules that you might hold to a little bit more closely, just to allow for flexibility. There's something to be said for having a flexible state of mind when it comes to food, because then as you do start to incorporate more foods into the diet, it becomes more sustainable long term. The question really becomes like, what diet plan is going to be sustainable for you long term? Some diets will give you pretty quick results, but they aren't necessarily going to be sustainable long term because it also required you to take out a bunch of foods that maybe you like. Now, the Mediterranean diet is one that has quite a bit of flexibility, and there's a lot of good research that, that has great impact because it's packed with phytochemicals, fruits and vegetables, vitamins and minerals, omega-3 fatty acids through fatty fish, those types of things. I would say that's a diet that's going to be more sustainable because there's greater flexibility in the foods that you can choose. So I think that's what I would say overall.
Thank you. So our two last questions kind of relate to you as with the faculty member and a mom. So the first one is, I know you showed your kids snack plates and you talked about healthy choices and trying to get them to eat. So somebody reached out and they asked about how to make easy, healthy choices for your family. She has kids and she's a stay-at-home mom, but she also wanted to know just some of your good go-to snacks for on the go.
Oh, I really like a recipe that we actually make a lot in lab with our students at Miami is called Power Balls, and it's like oatmeal with peanut butter. You can put flaxseed in there, honey, and you kind of just roll the whole thing up. Chocolate chips typically is a better selling point, especially for kids. But they can help make those. That's one thing that's really useful is I find that anytime I actually involve my kids, the caveat to that being I understand that that can sometimes be inconvenient in way of process. It's not super easy to always involve them, but when you can, they're more excited to try it after they make it because their little hands were in there. So I really like Power Balls, and there's some that are like pre-made, like the Made Good brand is coming to mind. They have like little energy ball things that come in small on-the-go packs. So I like to take those. But sometimes when we're out and about and on the go, we just take bags of cereal and things like that because I, again, like to make it practical and also the easiest thing to kind of clean up when we're out and about. So I don't think there's any harm in just kind of relying a little bit on those things. And there's some cereals too, especially in the US food manufacturing, that a lot of our cereals are fortified with a lot of B vitamins and also iron, which is really great for kids across the board. So things like shredded mini wheats, like the frosted ones, but just good old Cheerios and things like that can be great for on the go.
I got some tips from that too. I'm like, ooh, okay, these are all really good ideas. So we another question came in that I want to ask, but the other one I mentioned about being a faculty member. So as a busy faculty member, she asks, with back-to-back classes, how do I stay hydrated?
Oh man, I feel you. Yes, I understand that. That's tricky. I never have my water bottle too far from me. When I'm on campus, I will be honest with you, I've not been the best at staying hydrated myself. So I understand that. What I've been trying to do is just keep my water bottle full. And then I just drink it throughout class now. Like I'll just take a water break. I find that the students at this point too in the semester, they don't really seem to mind if I'm taking a break from talking. So yeah, I try to keep my water bottle full as much as possible and just keep it with me on the go. But I hear you. As a faculty member who travels between multiple buildings too, it's really hard because you also have to know, where the bathroom is too.
Thank you. And then we do have one more question. So you talked about intuitive eating. Somebody asked, they said they read an article once where a doctor recommended that to stop eating at 80% full. So she wants to know where on the 1 to 10 point scale is this, and how do you feel about the idea of stopping eating when 80% full in the framework of intuitive eating?
This is such a timely question. Actually, so in my introductory nutrition class, the students do some group presentations, and we were talking about blue zone diets yesterday. And I believe this is where the 80% full. So some of the blue zone diet information will tell you that the people in blue zones will eat until they're 80% full. I personally, if you're just off the top of my head, if somebody said, hey, stop when you're 80% full, I think I would just look very confused. I don't know that that's super easy to do. I don't know if I could tell you when I'm 80% full. But I would say that between that 3 and 7, so if you would get to like a 7 on that scale, where it's like, I am satisfied, and if I stop now, I'm full, is kind of where I would place that on the intuitive eating part of things. Because to me, that just says like, I'm not uncomfortably full. Now, whether or not 100% is uncomfortable, I can't really tell you, because that I have read that as well, and I'm not certain I would be able to stop at 80% either. So, but I would say on that scale, I would say 7 is what you'd be aiming for.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you, Bryn, for today. It was awesome. This was such a great presentation. I think we learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, of course.
Good luck with the end of the semester. And
Thank you.
to all of you in the audience who tuned in and asked questions. We really appreciate your time. So I'd like to make sure that you can see all other upcoming webinars and even our past webinars at alumlc.org/MiamiOH. These are free and open to all, so be sure to check those out. Thanks again for watching today's event, and thank you again, Bryn. And have a great rest of your afternoon, and love and honor.